All right. Good evening, everybody. Now let's go ahead and get your questions in. Hello there, Eddie. Hey, Carter, and all of the other great people over there. So let's go ahead and get your questions in. Also, I'm creating a poll that will be up in just a second. And this poll is set up to just see what it is that your class is doing. Okay. So, what is your class? Because what I've seen in some of these things is all the questions will come from a handful of people and they're not actually the questions that most people in the group have. So let's go look at that. That's Reformation. Okay, I've just put this poll up. Okay, I'm echoing. Uh-oh. All right, let's see if am I echoing for other people? Y'all go ahead and let me know. Let me know. Is the sound okay? Owen says I'm echoing. Am I echoing? Okay. So Nora says I'm okay. So there we go. Not echoing. All right. Now, one thing that I've heard Amanda tell people, if you're experiencing any kind of technical difficulties with this, sign out, like close the window and then come back, because some of these difficulties are unique to you. So as far as that goes, take a look at that. Yeah, Camilla says I'm fine. So we're going to go with that. But yeah, if you're experiencing any difficulties, just leave and come back and see how that works for you. All right. So we've got, as far as the poll here, okay, a lot of you still on the Renaissance. Wow. Okay, now of course I'm finishing up the Reformation, but I'm on a semester thing, so that may be a little different. Okay, so we've got about the Renaissance and the Reformation are equally represented here. Miss Marino's class, awesome. Okay, and Miss Marino's class, y'all are still looking at the Renaissance. Now, how's that different than last week? So explain to me where y'all are versus last week. Okay, so we've got some folks at the Reformation as well. And we might actually talk, okay, going in the Northern Renaissance. Okay, so let me go ahead then and take a look here. I've got some stuff to show to you. And I'm going to be probably making this into some videos for Fiveable very soon. Okay, well, let's go ahead and take a look at this then. Since we've got the Renaissance and the Reformation equally represented here, I've got a little bit something for both of you. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, so going into this. And then Fiveable AP Euro. Okay. So I'm going to go over Renaissance Humanists and Protestant Reformers during this session. And let's go ahead and take a look here. Of course, I can shout out to Mr. Bentley from LaSalle Institute, a veteran, a funny, and all-around great guy. All right. So shout out to Mr. Bentley from LaSalle Institute. Awesome. Good to see y'all here tonight. All right. So then, shout out to Mr. Clancy. He said he will give us bonus points on tomorrow's test. I like that. I like that. Okay, so y'all, well, that's a great way to market Fiveable. It's a way y'all can get some Tom Ritchie shout outs. Okay, awesome. So hello. Yes, yes. Dominic, good to see you here. All right, could I please give a shout out? Okay, yes. Miss Bautista, Patriot High School, shout out. Awesome. Okay, got that. And okay, so we've got, okay, and we'll get to Nicholas later on. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, let me go ahead and share a screen here. And so we're going to do a little quick review for Miss Marino's class. Now, remember, if your class has already done the Renaissance, it's okay to go back and look at it. Okay. Shout out to Eddie's mom, by the way. All right, Eddie, you wanted to shout out for your mom. There you go. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, even if you've already covered something, we're reviewing for the exam. And so that's what Fiveable's all about, is preparing you for the exam. So always remember that angle of it. So we're going to go ahead and take a look here at the Renaissance Humanists. All right. And so as far as the prominent Renaissance humanists, first of all, we've got the men of letters of the Italian Renaissance. These people who are really just are nerds per se. These are the people who are studying the classics largely because they enjoy enjoy nerding out over the classics, and that is the primary motivation. So you've got these men of letters, Italian Renaissance. Then the Civic Humanists. Now, these were people of the Italian Renaissance as well, but they are writing as far as they're writing about civic humanism. So in particular, preparing young men for public life, for public service, either to be a prince or a ruler, or that. Now, Amanda will be emailing PowerPoints later on. So yes, she will be sending a follow-up email with these PowerPoints, so they're not going away and y'all will have access to them. Good question there, Liam. And then finally, the Christian humanist of the Northern Renaissance. Erasmus and Thomas More, especially the Erasmus, what they refer to that as often is Christian humanism. But the Northern Renaissance, they're studying the classics to improve society. So these first categories, remember, are both Italian Renaissance. They're studying for intellectual fulfillment. Then they're studying classics for political advancement, Machiavelli and Castiglione. And then with the Christian humanist of the Northern Renaissance, Erasmus and Thomas More, they want to improve society. So as far as the men of letters, you've got Petrarch, Pico, and Lorenzo Valla. Now, Petrarch isn't so much known for all of it, for a single work, as his whole body of work. So Petrarch, for what he was writing, he was crowned poet laureate. He was given the award of poet laureate, basically the winning poet, the one who gets the laurels in Florence, I think it was, right? So the father of humanism. And then he rediscovered forgotten writings of Cicero and a lot of other things about Petrarch, but knowing that's the father of humanism. Now, Pico della Mirandola, the Oration on the Dignity of Man. This is referred to often as the manifesto of the Renaissance, and it's putting out the closest thing that people might describe to a humanist philosophy. Now, you might think about, when it comes down to it, all of these people are humanists and they've got different philosophies. So there's not a single humanist philosophy, but to the extent that there was one, Pico. And the idea of syncretism. Now, syncretism means that we're putting together, we're making the classics and the Greek and Roman classics and the Christian tradition, that we're putting all of that in sync with each other. So that is the idea there. And then, of course, the emphasis on free will, which seems to be a very key theme of the Renaissance, to stress the significance of the human free will. Now, also, you've got, while these guys are nerding out, you've got Lorenzo Valla, who wrote his treatise on the false donation of Constantine. That Valla got this document that the Pope said was real, and it was kind of funny because Valla's a priest, so he's really writing about his boss here. But Lorenzo Valla was a priest, and he looked, this is called philology. This word actually shows up in your concept outline, philology. And so the thing is that this is taking a text and criticizing it, like going through and saying, well, this is actually historically inaccurate. They're referring to, like, this text says that it was written in 365 AD, but it refers to this event that was in 384 AD. So that can't be right. And then if we look at the style of Greek that's used here, then or Latin or whatever, then we see that. We see, okay, well, this isn't from the right time. It's not the right syntax. So Valla showed basically a mythbuster, kind of going through and showing that this donation of Constantine that said that Constantine wanted the Pope to rule Italy, that this document was a forgery and it wasn't the real thing, that it really didn't come from Constantine. So then we go on to the civic humanists, Machiavelli and Castiglione. Now, Machiavelli, the author of The Prince, there you go, Owen, myth busted. And The Prince is, of course, a handbook for strong rulers. This is for somebody who wants to be a successful ruler. And the end justifies the means. Now, remember, Machiavellianism is amoral. Okay, it's a philosophy that does not have a set morality attached to it. And so, with that, it's amoral. And also, he says it's better to be feared than loved. Okay, and that's something that's very practical advice, because when somebody loves you, they typically love you as long as you're doing what they want you to do. Okay, so you're doing what they want you to do, and then as long as that's the case, then they love you. Okay, so going from there, you see that, but you don't want to be hated. So it's but it's amoral. It's basically about success, not about following a code of morals, and it's about being strong on the model of the old Roman emperors. And then Castiglione wrote the Courtier, or the Book of the Courtier, and this book by Castiglione, this is a guide to how to advise a ruler, a guide to gentlemanly conduct, or even part of it addresses ladylike behavior. So this is really how to get along in polite society and how to win the trust of a ruler, because not many people are actually going to be rulers, but if you can be the person who has the ruler's ear, then that's going to be a thing. If the audio is not working, now if you see other people complaining, then I need to act on that. But sometimes just getting out of here and coming back in helps out. All right. So as far as that goes, the Courtier and Machiavelli's The Prince, Machiavelli and Castiglione are both trying to help people advance through society and be political leaders. All right, Renaissance. It's a courtesy book. Yes, the Courtier is what they might call a courtesy book, learning how to be the type of person that's expected of you, or something like that. Okay. Now, then we get to Christian humanists. Now, one thing we want to note here is that most of these writers, if not all, were Christians on some level or another. It's just that Erasmus and More in the Northern Renaissance are bringing the Christianity part of it to the forefront and focus less on the secularism that you see in the Italian Renaissance. So that's something to make sure you're associating with the Northern Renaissance. Now, Erasmus, who wrote The Praise of Folly. Now, first of all, he personified folly, and this is a classical style of writing, okay? Like when you think about our United States Capitol, has a statue of freedom on top. Now, freedom is portrayed as a woman. So to portray an idea as a person is something that was very common in Greek and especially Roman literature, USA. Now, and he criticized the Catholic Church from within. And this is important when you get to the Reformation, that Erasmus he's criticizing the Catholic Church, but as a faithful Catholic. He's somebody that does not at all question the Catholic Church and its doctrines, but he questions some of the practices, and that's really what a great deal of The Praise of Folly is about. All right, so as far as that, then Thomas More's Utopia. Now, he is trying to characterize the ideal society. Now, he's inspired by Plato's Republic. And that's another way that you can see, no matter where, between the Italian and the Northern Renaissance, they are all trying to emulate, they're trying to imitate the classical writers. That is their priority, is to imitate the classical writers. Okay, so with that, let me go ahead and get out of here because that concludes our broadcast today. Now, make sure that I have a YouTube channel, but so does Fiveable. Okay, so make sure if you go to youtube.com/thinkfiveable, same as following them on Twitter or Instagram. So youtube.com Fiveable. And so make sure to subscribe to Fiveable's YouTube channel. That's going to have, because I've got a lot of videos, okay, Rivalry people. So as far as that goes, what I want to make clear is I put out a lot of videos on my channel, but there are some videos that are going to go on Fiveable's channel. So you want to make sure you're subscribed to that channel as well, because there's going to be some stuff that for this subject and for other AP subjects that you're taking. All right, let me go and see if we've got any questions here. All right, now, as far as what I was saying, these men of letters, okay, Petrarch is studying the classics, not because he wants to be a politician. Petrarch was a poet. So as a man of letters, Petrarch, Pico, and Valla, these are all people who they didn't have any other agenda rather than to study the classics. And then you look at Machiavelli and Castiglione, civic humanism, which means that we're preparing people for civic engagement, to be people who are in the government and stuff like that. That's what we mean by civic. So it depends if you're studying the classics for personal edification or for political advancement. All right, so we're finished answering that one. And the Reformation, let's see, non-religious motivations. Okay. All right, so did Machiavelli, all right. Well, actually, Machiavelli wrote about how to get and maintain, really more how to maintain the power than anything else. It's just a matter of the courtier is someone who is under the, like an advisor to a ruler. So somebody reading the book of the Courtier, they don't intend to actually be a ruler themselves. Rather, they intend to serve a ruler, which is what many more people do. That any ruler has a court around them of preferred people. So Castiglione is talking about both of them. Really, you can get into taking power and maintaining. So I would do the distinction whether to rule or whether to serve a ruler. Okay, so what? I have no idea what you're talking about, Owen. So we're just going to delete that. I don't know if he's trolling or what. All right. So the purpose or inspiration. Okay. So Carter, Machiavelli's The Prince is about how to be a strong ruler. The inspiration was the Roman emperors. So the old Roman emperors, these are people who were strong rulers. And so as far as that goes, it's about being, it's like if we can have leaders more like the Roman emperors, we would make Italy great again, so to speak. And so let's see. William Shakespeare was a Renaissance playwright. Now, I don't know about a humanist. I'm not sure if he read Latin or not, because really humanists at that time, reading Latin was very, very important in looking at texts in their original languages. Now, I would say that Shakespeare's plays have humanist elements because he's got his play about Julius Caesar, which was one of his more popular plays. And so I think that you could certainly argue that there is an amount of humanism present in Shakespeare's work. Not sure if I would talk about Shakespeare as a humanist, but then again, but remember, really, humanism is about the original languages as part of that movement as well. All right. I don't know, Owen. We're just going to delete that one. So as far as that, short answer. Okay. I just wanted that to be there when it went to Greg's question. It's like, Greg, what are you talking about? Any of this stuff. Now, the thing is, the Renaissance may be too early for SAQs, okay? And it may be too early for the DBQ. There are a couple things there. Now, Renaissance is, of course, fair game on, now the LEQ, the Renaissance is almost guaranteed to be there, okay? Because the basically a period one, like a pre-1648, a pre-1648 LEQ is always guaranteed to be there. So that's something that you want to make sure to note, that there's always going to be a pre-1648 LEQ. Now, the DBQs, I believe, typically start at 1600. So you're not going to see a Renaissance DBQ on the actual exam. And then as far as the SAQs, pretty sure that I'd have to look that up, but I know that it's fair game on the LEQ and the multiple choice. And I think the SAQs actually have at least one area where those could be put in there as well. All right. Nice job, because we did already talk about, yes, nice job there. Somebody answered, looks like James answered Carter's question. The donation to Constantine was a document the Roman Catholic Church said was a letter from Constantine to the Pope, and Lorenzo Valla was like, nope. All right. So Hmm. Not so sure about that, even though you're getting kind of into the weeds here, that we're getting a little deeper than the exam's going to go. I know Tupac liked Machiavelli, so he read him when he was in jail. So that's why he called that one album that he put out later under another name, he called it Machiavelli, because he's really nodding to Machiavelli, was really the uh really kind of the impetus there. All right. Now, would Martin Luther be considered a humanist? Now, it really depends, because Martin Luther, if you look at it in terms of philosophically, the Renaissance humanists tended to be they were optimistic about the human potential and about free will. So there are some things about the humanistic philosophy that Martin Luther probably would not be identified with. But if you think in terms of, humanism in terms of classical texts and stuff like this, okay? And Martin Luther, if you think about it, I mean, he really like changed Christianity a great deal, because he turned it into a book-based religion. And Christianity in the Middle Ages was not something that was based on, somebody wouldn't say, oh, I believe the Bible, or I read the Bible all the time. And so, Martin Luther is doing something there in terms of making Christianity, in a lot of ways, making a classical text very key, like one of the foundations for Christianity. Now, of course, the scriptures in the Catholic faith are very important as well, but Martin Luther brings the scriptures to like a whole new level of prominence and visibility in in Christendom. All right, so as far as that, we got that one. And Zwingli, okay. Now, one thing I'm going to note, Yali see, that Zwingli never appears in the AP Euro course description. Okay, like I searched for Zwingli, he doesn't appear. Now, not to say you couldn't use him as evidence in a DBQ, LEQ, or SAQ. Not to say that he might not come up as a stimulus item where they say, well, you didn't have to know him, but here's his perspective. But I would say that Luther and Calvin and Henry VIII would be your three most important reformers, and the Anabaptists show up in the course description. So that's another thing that you might want to note, is that the Anabaptists, you might want to know a little bit about them too. And the Anabaptists rejected church and state. They called for a separation of church and state and a few other things like that. But the Anabaptists were even more radical than the Calvinists. But when I'm teaching, I typically focus on Luther, Calvin, and Henry VIII, while drawing attention to the fact the Anabaptists were there. But I'm not sure. That's a question that's probably, you're never going to have to answer that question for the exam. All right, even though it's an interesting one. Can I talk about how the printing press affected Protestantism? Okay. Now, as far as that, yes, first of all, one of the things about the printing press, when we think about Martin Luther and elevating the Bible to a point of really something that is completely central to the Christian experience, part of that is the printing press, that Bibles are more readily available, that the reason, it's not like there were Bibles laying around all over the place in the Middle Ages and they were like, I don't want to read that, but it was just more that they didn't have any kind of, they just didn't have enough books. And so most people didn't have access to a Bible. Literacy wasn't quite as big of a deal. So when you think about it, the printing press is increasing access to printed materials. It's also allowing Protestants to get their words out there. So when we think about this, that before, in the Middle Ages, if there was a local heretic, they were typically burned before their teachings got out there too far. And so then, as far as that goes, that's what you're looking at. Now with the printing press, Martin Luther could get his stuff out there. So could other reformers. John Calvin could publish the Institutes of the Christian Religion and circulate that throughout Europe. And so that's contributing to the spread of Protestantism, but also Protestantism revolves around literacy as well. And so that's something that, in Protestant schools, Protestant communities, they start teaching kids how to read so that they can read the Bible. And so that's resulting in an increase in literacy in Europe. So yeah, the printing press is something that is definitely a causal factor in the Protestant Reformation, and also something that continues to be important in developing Protestantism. And let's see, I'm going, Carter, we might have to put a limit on the number of your questions, buddy. All right, the significance of the Tudor family during the Reformation. Okay, so of course you've got Henry VIII, who started the Reformation, and really after Henry VIII. Now remember that Henry VIII did not have religious motivations for his Reformation, and so Henry dies and his son takes over, his son Edward. And Edward VI, he's a kid, but he's a Protestant kid. And you start to see some things happen, like they get rid of clerical celibacy. All Henry really did was secede from the Catholic Church and seize the assets from the monasteries. That's really the extent of anything that Henry VIII did. And then Edward, you've got the Book of Common Prayer with Thomas Cranmer and the abolition of clerical celibacy. Now, Mary Tudor, Edward's older sister, actually. It's his sisters came up after him. I've got a video on this, by the way. Remember, youtube.com/Tom Ritchie. And as far as that goes, that, she tries to bring it back to Catholicism. And then you've got Elizabeth, who establishes Protestantism, but Elizabeth establishes that we're not going to try to go like way into Protestantism. Like if you watched the wedding between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, you're probably thinking as you're watching that this really is, it could be it's a Catholic looking ceremony, that it's not like it's fundamentally different from something you might see in a Catholic church. So the Elizabethan settlement is like, we're going to have a uniform religion, but we're not going to go too far from Catholicism. We're trying to try to keep as many things about the church as we can, because remember that Henry's declaration that England is going to be Protestant was met with a lot of resistance. The Pilgrimage of Grace, you had people marching against this and saying that we want to remain Catholic. And so as far as that goes, let's see. All right. I get that question probably about twice a week, John. Now, I don't know about Henry's strong Protestant beliefs. I'm going to go over this Reformation thing in a little bit. But remember that Henry got onto the scene as the defender of the faith, so to speak, that Henry VIII was actually writing against Luther in his defense of the seven sacraments. And so, Henry VIII, it's not like strong Protestant beliefs. Now, the thing is, though, that Thomas More, Sir St. Thomas More, the author of Utopia, he was Henry VIII's chancellor, the person who's basically in charge of running the government so that the king can chase foxes and women. And so Thomas More refused to acknowledge Henry as the supreme head of the church. He said the supreme head of the church is in Rome, and he is the Pope. And so Henry did have Thomas More executed. So that is, there were people now, but it's nothing like Bloody Mary necessarily. But I think pretty sure there were also some leaders of the Pilgrimage of Grace that were executed. Henry VIII, you hear a lot about his wives who were killed and that sort of thing, but there were a lot of hangings during the reigns of Henry VII, Henry VIII, just lots of executions at that time. So, but yes, that Henry, I mean, I don't know if as many as, with Bloody Mary, it was like 300. I don't think it was that many, but there were some people that were made examples of, most notably Thomas More, where he's willing to execute his own chancellor over this. All right. Did the Catholic Church have a revolt? Joseph, take a look at my video on the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Counter-Reformation. So the Council of Trent was a direct response to the Reformation. And yes, the Catholics did respond. And eventually, the Catholics actually regained a lot of ground after the Council of Trent. So, but also take a look at my video lecture on the Council of Trent, and also the one I've got on Baroque art, because that'll go into the Counter-Reformation as well. All right, so let's take a look at this. All right. Okay, I'm seeing 15 here, so let's take a look here. How did the reformers raise questions about the role of women in the family, society, and the church? James, this reads like and I've got 14 upvotes for something like this. This reads like you and your friends are in here and you're just trying to get your LEQ written for you. That's the vibe that I'm getting here. It's just not one of those questions that somebody asks just off the blue. Right. I would never try to get somebody to do my homework for me. Okay. So as far as all right. So as far as that goes, now one thing that, it's not an LEQ, it's an SAQ, right? But one thing is that you've got the end of clerical celibacy. So that's something that you've got married priests. Now, the other thing is that women are going to tend to, they're going to be taught to read, just like the young boys are. Everybody's going to be taught to read. So that's another thing. And all right. But anyway, now, you've got now, of course, that a woman needs to be an example in the home. Now, remember that women at this time, this was an agricultural society. So it's not like women are working they're not like in the home cleaning and cooking and stuff. A lot of people tend to think that people just keep, like, women just keep cleaning and cooking the entire time that anything's happening at all. But that would be one thing. But as far as that goes, I've got some more detailed notes on that. But this is like one of those questions that it just looks like somebody got that off an assignment they're doing rather than preparing for the exam. All right, non-religious motivations. Okay, so first of all, Nicholas, you've got Henry VIII, who he's not having a son, so he needs to continue his dynasty. Okay, he needs to continue his dynasty, and he's concerned about that. And there's a good-looking woman, Anne Boleyn. So these non-religious motivations for the Protestant Reformation: one, political power, and then when you think about Frederick of Saxony, I don't think Frederick of Saxony was the guy that protected Martin Luther, and it's not like Frederick of Saxony was like, oh, I have such a problem with Catholic doctrine. Frederick of Saxony had a pretty epic relic collection. And so he was a devout Catholic, but he saw an opportunity to get some power, because remember that kings and lords were constantly contesting against the church for political power. So, oops, I shouldn't try to talk and imbibe water at the same time. Stay hydrated, kids. So as far as that goes, that you've got the idea that these political leaders are trying to escape the Catholic Church's political influence. Okay. And Thomas Cromwell was Henry VIII's chancellor after Thomas More, of course. And Thomas Cranmer was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who became the head of or at least the functional head, the administrative head of the Church of England. And remember that Bloody Mary got Thomas Cranmer to recant his Protestant beliefs after torture and kind of like psychological torture, putting him in a situation where he was in a cell, and then offering him some comfort. And so once he got that comfort, he recanted, and then they said, we're executing you anyway. But Thomas Cranmer was the author of the Book of Common Prayer. All right. Okay, Martin Luther and Zwingli, I've got stuff on there. Okay, Calvinism affected the Renaissance. Now, I would think, Matt, how has the Renaissance affected Calvinism? Probably, because one thing that we want to note is that the Institutes of the Christian Religion were originally written in Latin. So if you wanted to be taken seriously as an academic, you had to write in Latin. And so that's one thing that you do see, that the Renaissance is affecting Calvinism. And also Calvin gets all of his doctrines using Luther's Sola Scriptura, consults the Bible for all of his doctrines. So that's another aspect of the Renaissance. All right, nice job. Yeah, I didn't know some of y'all are in here, didn't even know I had a YouTube channel. All right, so we got some of that. All right. So wow, y'all are really asking. Okay, so let me go into the main presentation. Now remember, y'all are going to be shocked to find out that your tests are actually going to be in a your tests are actually going to focus on the big picture stuff. Some of y'all are asking some really super specific questions. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, Protestant reformers. Okay, so first of all, like I said, when I'm looking at reformers, I'm looking at Martin Luther, Henry VIII, and John Calvin. And again, Amanda will be sending these slides out at the conclusion of this session. All right, so as far as that, and remember that we will be doing some more of these free sessions, but y'all might want to think about, if y'all are finding these helpful, you might want to think about subscribing to Fiveable. Now, some of your teachers got that Fiveable for Teachers offer. I'm guessing Miss Marino might have done that. So if you're one of Miss Marino's students, you might already be in it. I'm not sure. But in any case, just to make sure that you keep coming here with us. All right, speaking of shameless plugs, but then again, we are here with Fiveable, so that company does have to make some money if we're going to keep doing this. All right. Now, I actually don't grade anymore, and Eddie, last year was the first year that I wasn't grading, so I did have a buzzword. We had Dragon Energy was our buzzword on. I scored essays for like 8 years, and then they didn't invite me back this year. So I was just like, okay. And so as far as that goes, that we will have a code word. Yes, we will have a code word, and y'all will be able to write that on your essay. The thing is, it's whatever. It's just they can invite who they want to invite and all of that kind of stuff. So it's no skin off my back, trust me. So I mean, it's pretty boring doing that. No, I didn't meet. I met Miss Marino in Miami. Okay, my grading powers. All right, I'm really not that good at grading people, but anyway, Martin Luther. Best known for, they had two. It was too much legend. There you go. All right, there y'all go. Y'all are great. I tell you, this is such a great group. So Martin Luther, best known for writing the 95 Theses, okay? And he was a moderate reformer. So it means that Martin Luther didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but he did things like, okay, church says there are 7 sacraments. I'm going to say there are 3. And stuff like that. Now, religiously motivated, that Martin Luther was motivated by doctrine. All right, so that's important to note, that he had religious motivations. Now, as far as accepted subordination, okay, of the church to the state, okay, so what this is essentially, remember that the Catholic Church claimed that time that the church is supreme over everything, and that church authority is a higher authority than state authority. Now, Luther was dependent on Frederick of Saxony and other protectors, and so he had to kind of help them out too. Now, remember when the German Peasants' Revolt broke out, he didn't, he said, I'm not supporting this. I'm taking the side of the nobles. So Luther, that's one of the things when y'all talk about why did people support Martin Luther? It wasn't just because of his doctrines. In a lot of cases, probably wasn't even primarily or even a reason for some of these nobles to support him. But Luther was offering them a chance not to be hassled by a church leader, that the church would just be a church and would not try to assert political authority. Got it? Now, so then you've got, then we've got Henry VIII, best known for writing the defense of the 7 sacraments, which was actually defending the church. And he was a conservative reformer. Henry was not out to try to, he wasn't out to try to change things. He only wanted political power. He's politically motivated. And then he demanded church subordination to the state. Okay, so basically combined the church with the state and put himself over both. So he demanded the subordination of the church to the state. Now, then there's John Calvin in Switzerland, best known for writing the Institutes of the Christian Religion, and a radical reformer. Now, as I'm going to mention a little bit, not quite as radical as the Anabaptists, people like that, but much more radical than Luther. All right. So as far as that, yes, that basically in terms of Luther and Henry VIII, the church will be subordinated to the state. Now, John Calvin was actually more Catholic in his thinking here, that John Calvin combined, like basically that the religious leaders need to be in charge. Like Calvin actually Calvin went Michael Vick on some heretic one time, burned that guy at the stake. So that was, Calvin, it got real. And Calvin burned heretics just like the Catholics did. So Calvin, that's one thing that if you were comparing, I know, I don't know why somebody brought up Michael Vick, but there we go. But as far as that goes, yeah, somebody should burn that guy at the stake. But anyway, all right. So as far as that, animal cruelty is just not my thing, people. Now, Martin Luther was a Catholic monk, 95 Theses. Now, first of all, Martin Luther is criticizing the sale of indulgences, but that's not all, because remember that Erasmus criticized the way some things were going in the church, but he didn't criticize the doctrines, okay? And so as far as that goes, it's not just the sale of indulgences, but he goes on to question the Pope's spiritual authority. Luther was big into sola scriptura, that only scripture should be used in order to formulate doctrine. And then justification by faith alone. All right. So as far as that goes, justification by faith alone, which means that remember that your works have nothing to do with it. And Luther had a view of free will that was not absolute, that he believed that the will was somewhat in bondage. He had an argument with a debate with Erasmus over this, because of course Erasmus argued from the Catholic perspective of the freedom of the Catholic perspective of free will. All right, let me go ahead and put another poll out there. All right. Let's see what y'all think about that. All right, now since we're talking about executing heretics, should Michael Vick be burned at the stake? All right, we'll see what y'all think. I'm kind of curious to see how that goes. All right, oh, that one's a pretty close. That's a pretty close one. Oh my goodness. Oh wow, this thing's moving. All right, so as far as that goes, I'll check that in a bit. Now, Frederick of Saxony was his noble patron. So when you're studying Luther, you need to also note Frederick of Saxony. And Luther's movement was politically advantageous. So that's why people backed him. And when it came time to pay the piper, when the German peasants' revolt broke out and the peasants were like, hey, we heard Martin Luther say this, this, and this, and he said we're all equal, so we're revolting. We're going to kill nobles and burn their property. And Luther said, no. Like I said that you are equal in the next life, not necessarily in this one. So you need to actually obey the powers that be. So that's Luther. All right. So Luther is, again, subordinating the church to state authority and saying that I'm going to do what my purpose is not to supersede the state or to influence the state. The church and the state really have separate spheres. And then Henry VIII was doctrinally Catholic, and it opposed Luther. Remember, he had dynastic concerns, he had no sons, and he sought an annulment. Now, remember that Catholics don't let you get divorced, okay? So you have to get an annulment. Basically, this never happened. And so Henry then has the Church of England that is established through the Act of Supremacy, which is backed by Parliament. Okay, so they approve the Act of Supremacy, and which makes him the supreme head, and the church is subordinated to the state. Okay, so essentially a state-controlled church. Okay, a state-controlled national church. All right, so that's really what you're looking at. What you're looking at here is a state-controlled national church. All right, and let's see, a state-controlled national church. Let me make that just a little bit smaller since I added that there. Just want to make sure that that's okay. There we go. There we go. All right. So then we move on to John Calvin, and then I'll take some questions. Okay. So I'll take some questions from there. All right. So going into that now, John Calvin, a radical reformer. Now, as I said before, that some reformers, such as the Anabaptists, were more radical than John Calvin. Okay, so that's something that's important to note there, that some of, now the Anabaptists were more radical, but compared to Martin Luther and Henry VIII, John Calvin is pretty radical. Okay. So then the Institutes, that's the book that he wrote, or the Institutes of the Christian Religion, and his theology, Calvinist theology that he outlines in the Institutes, it is based on the sovereignty of God. Now, the sovereignty of God, which you'll use this word sovereignty when you look at the absolutists as well. Okay, so the sovereignty of God is this idea that God can do whatever he wants. Now, absolute rulers say that they can do whatever they want, okay, that they have the ultimate power there. And so as far as that goes, that he says that salvation is changed, is determined not by you, not even by your faith. So the Catholic Church says, it's your faith, God's grace plus your faith, and your faith is backed by good works to show that it's sincere. Then Luther says God's grace, your faith, and works don't count at all because we don't really have free will. Now, John Calvin, your faith really has nothing to do with it because God's grace is the whole thing. Okay, so predestination, God already decided before anybody was born or anything like that, that he chose certain people to go to heaven and others not to. Now, the people that he's chosen to go to heaven are the elect. Now, some people think, oh, you could do whatever you want, right? Because God's already made up his mind. But the issue here is that if God has chosen you and extended his grace to you, yeah, it's a rigged system, John Brown. Yeah, it's a rigged system. And the election was rigged. Oh, wow, that's a good one. John Brown. Let's hear it for John Brown. All right, definitely it's a rigged system. The election was rigged. All right. So as far as that goes, oh, that's great. But iconoclasm. All right. Another thing about Calvinists is they go in and they would smash icons. They would smash statues. They would burn things. So Calvinist churches were clear of any kind of imagery or relics or anything like that. And you're very welcome. Very welcome. And so then also remember that the church and the state, like this is basically a religious leader who is running the community. And so really not altogether different from Catholicism in that sense. All right, so as far as that goes, we will definitely send that to you after the broadcast is concluded. Make sure that y'all subscribe to Fiveable's channel, Fiveable's YouTube channel, because Fiveable's YouTube channel is going to have some of the videos that I'm making this year. Okay, so I'm going to be putting some over the next week. I'm going to be putting some videos up. So we want to make sure that you're subscribed to Fiveable's channel, youtube.com/thinkfiveable. Now, my channel's up there as well. And if anybody wants a shout out, if you want to follow me on Instagram at Tom Ritchie, I will give you a little shout out while I'm answering questions. Okay, so how long is this live? I'm going to be going, I guess, in about another 10 minutes. These things usually last about an hour. All right, so let's see. Did y'all? Oh my goodness! All right, y'all are ready for people to be burned at the stake. All right. I like to listen to mostly, I would say that most of what I listen to is metal, is what I like the most. And then there are some other things, maybe if I need to be motivated, some occasional gangster rap or something like that. Lana Del Rey is great if I'm not in the mood for metal. Lana is the best. And we've got Wise Mata and Cobrian.10. Thank y'all for the Instagram followers. I love Lana too. She is my favorite. She's the best. All right. So as far as that, now one thing we want to note about Zwingli, the big disagreement between Luther and Zwingli that really stopped them from joining forces is that they disagreed on the Eucharist. Now, I've got a video on transubstantiation where I talk about what that is. Now, the Catholic Church says transubstantiation, okay, that the bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ. They are. So that's why Catholics kneel before the sacrament, because that's true. That is Christ. And so then Zwingli says, no, it's just a memorial. Jesus is speaking as a metaphor. Okay. And so as far as that, okay, y'all go easy on me. This was a gift from Arkansas High School. Okay. So yeah, this was a gift. I visited their school. They gave me the shirt. I like the shirt. Okay. They don't play against Clemson. So, but anyway, Zwingli says this is purely symbolic. Jesus is just speaking metaphorically. And Luther says, but sola scriptura, Jesus is speaking, so it must mean something. And so Luther said that he didn't believe in transubstantiation. He didn't believe the Catholic view that it becomes physically the body and blood of Christ, but he believed that Christ is spiritually present in the bread and wine. So Zwingli saying that it's only a memorial, it's purely symbolic, that's the main thing that separates him from Luther doctrinally. And so as far as that goes, and we got Vladimir and Owen, thank y'all for the Instagram follows. I tell you what, and Leubis. All right, thank you very much. Did I say that? I don't even know if this has a Finsta vibe to it, doesn't it? But we'll see. Anyway, all right. So the Council of Blood, I'm not sure exactly what that is. Review. Now, one thing that I would note here, Juliana, I would say that you don't typically have to know the names of individual popes in order to, I would say, now, John Paul II might be when you're talking about the Cold War, but other than that, it's really like knowing who a particular pope was. You're not going to see that on that again. All right. Remember, everything to do with me is just my name, at Tom Ritchie or youtube.com. Remember /Tom Ritchie. But remember also to subscribe to Fiveable's channel. Think Fiveable. Okay. And so I already sent that message. Okay. So let me just make sure. Yeah. Tom Ritchie on YouTube. So I'll have some stuff there. All right. Cobrian followed me again. I think wanted a shout out. Wanted another shout out. We got, Andrixito, Bina. Okay, whatever that. Okay, so all kinds of interesting stuff. Okay, so British Columbia. All right. So then Jade Basketball Freak, Mark, Androsotted, Reagan, C. Washik, Danny Lee, J.W. Huncho. And yeah, thank y'all. All right. So ladies and gentlemen, so the War of the Three Henrys. Now, oops. Okay, so the War of the Three Henrys, this is really just part of the French Wars of Religion. Now, do you need to know all about the French Wars of Religion and all the stuff? You probably could never use the words War of the Three Henrys, but this is really like part of the wars of Henry and Navarre, and I guess the King of France and another Henry somewhere. So this is basically the Catholics and the Huguenots are fighting each other. I've got a video about that on YouTube, French Wars of Religion. So go ahead and take a look at that. All right. And so the Catholic Reformation, we are shouting out to Bautista. All right. So the Catholic Reformation or Counter-Reformation, again, I've got a video about this. It's important to note that there are really two things here about the Counter-Reformation, or as we might say, the Catholic Reformation. All right. And Alexia actually going in there and liking stuff. Nice job there, Alexia. And then we've got Vladimir. Why are y'all refollowing? Anka, DNCR, and Jillian. All right. So as far as that stuff, ladies and gentlemen, that the Catholic Reformation or the Counter-Reformation. Now, Counter-Reformation, and they're the same thing, but when we think Counter-Reformation, we think against Protestantism, and that's part of it. But we also want to note that there is the internal reformation of the Catholic Church. So it's the Council of Trent, I've said before, that they have the affirmation of church doctrine. The doctrine is not seen as a problem. There's going to be no doctrinal compromise with Protestants. But they will change the way that they're doing some things. They will fight corruption and stuff like that. Okay, so as far as that goes, I tell you, some of y'all are working hard on there. All right, and I tell you, Brianna's got she is doing a good job here. All right, so I tell you what, that might even warrant a follow back. Who knows? Why not? You know what? I'm feeling generous right now. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, so the Catholic Reformation is kind of like that reformation of church practice. So there's also an internal reformation. All right, so y'all are so funny. All right, so what have we got? What have we got here? Okay, so I think that we're going to go ahead and call it a night. It looks like some people have done some things here. All right, and the Habsburgs. Now, remember that Charles V was somebody, he condemned Martin Luther. That the Habsburgs, when we look at Habsburg monarchs, they, which Philip II was a hardcore Catholic. So typically we will associate Habsburgs with very Catholic, very anti-Protestant, and that sort of thing. All right, so y'all are so funny. I think half of y'all are on the half of y'all are in the same class or something like that. Y'all are so funny. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I love you all so much. Can you get a dab? Why not, Mr. Bentley? All right. All right, so we got a little, I dabbed on that euro. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, y'all look out for an email from Amanda with the slides in it pretty soon. All right, it's always a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen.